How's it going, everyone? Dylan here from All You Can Board, and I'm finally back with another Marvel Champions video. After that spree we had with a bunch of announcements and packs coming out and everything, there were so many Marvel Champions videos I was creating at the same time. It was so much fun. I felt this lull now because we have this big gap before the next releases, but fear not, we are going to have Star-Lord and Gamora content coming in mid-May as soon as I get those packs in my hand. But for now, I'm going to be taking a look at my top 5 favorite protection allies. Now, there are a lot of cool protection allies, and I did have to narrow it down to 5, but I'm pretty happy with my picks. And if you don't know, protection might be my favorite aspect of the game. It's either protection or aggression. Those are the two that I enjoy playing the most, so naturally I think those are my favorite. So I'm really excited about this one to talk about a little bit. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think too. So after the video, after you've watched it, leave me a comment, let me know if you agree, disagree, which ones would be your picks. I'd be happy to discuss it, and I'd be really pumped to hear what you think. So let's jump right into number 5. Okay, so number 5 is a newer ally, and I always am a little bit worried when I put a newer ally on one of these lists, especially if they're really, really new, because you can always have that fear of having the rose-colored glasses on and, being really attracted to the new and how many times you're playing them and having some really good games and having that, skew the results and make you think that it might be better than it is. But I feel good about this, at least in my experience. I've enjoyed this ally enough to include them at this spot of the list. So this is Warlock from the Quicksilver pack. This is a 3-cost ally with 3 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack, a consequential damage on each of those. The ability is action, spend a mind resource to heal up to 2 damage from Warlock. So the idea here is that, yes, Warlock is doing minimal thwarting, minimal damage for 3 costs, but you're able to heal him up. So anytime he does any of those things and he takes a single consequential damage, or if you used him twice, which would be the ideal situation, you're able to heal him back up to full and repeat that process again. As a blocker, if you can be taking hits of less than 3, it's really good because you can have a blocker that you can heal back up and maintain that blocker. Now, it's not always easy, especially if you're playing on harder modes or against harder villains like in Galaxy's Most Wanted, to try to, block with Warlock and assume that you're going to take less than 3 and he's going to be able to stick around. But even just having that potential, I think, is really good. And that's why I'm putting him on the list, is because there's been enough times where I've been able to soak up a small hit from even a minion, like where I know the damage is going to be 1 or 2, heal Warlock back up and have him just be my minion blocker. He's just taking a bunch of hits from minions. If I know the minion is going to be dealing a single damage, I can still do a thwart or an attack with him, have him block that damage. And yeah, it's only a single damage you're blocking, but if it's persistent from a minion you're having to leave on the board, or whatever the case may be, having that blocker that is consistent that you can heal up is obviously really good. Of course, the condition is you need to have a mind resource. If you're building this in a deck where you just are building a deck that you just don't have a lot of mind resources, or it's not reliable, you're probably not going to see the right mileage out of Warlock. You're probably not going to get as much enjoyment out of him, and he's probably not even going to be on your top 5 list or even close to it if that's the case. In my case, the decks that I've been building had enough mind resources, and I was able to justify him being in there, and he worked out like a gem. So I really enjoy Warlock. Over time, as I play with more of these allies, especially as more allies are introduced, I could see this one being the one that's easily slips off this list. But for now, I'm comfortable with Warlock being there. I've had enough fun with him that I'm enjoying him enough to put him into a lot of decks. So that is Warlock, and that is my number 5. Okay, on to number 4. I'd already explained what my feelings are about new allies. This is the newest ally on the list, and it's the newest protection ally, I think, that has currently been released. That being said, I think this is a great ally, and it's also one that I think has enough potential that if I play with it a little bit more and it continues to have these results for me, this could actually move up the list over time. But because it's so new, I felt like this was probably the right spot to slot it in. So this is, of course, Starhawk, which came in the Galaxy's Most Wanted pack. This is a 2-cost ally. 2-cost allies already make your eyebrows, raise your eyebrows a little bit. 3 health, 2 attack, 1 thwart. The 2 attack has 2 consequential damage. The thwart has 1. The ability here is interrupt. When Starhawk takes damage exactly equal to his remaining hit points, return him to your hand. I love Starhawk, okay? I love him. I think that the design is super cool, and it affords a bunch of really, really, great opportunities to try to plan how an ally takes damage to be able to maximize that ally. If you can get a single return to your hand on Starhawk, I feel like it's a super high value card because it already has decent stats. It's already doing a decent amount for 2 costs. But the fact that you're going to get that back and either gain a resource or be able to play that ally again at full health is a huge, huge boost. So for 2 costs to have 3 health and be able to do 2 attack on one of its abilities is already really good. The 3 health might even allow it to be able to take a hit and survive, which again is great for a 2-cost ally. Now, the benefit here, the reason that it has 2 consequential damage on the attack and 1 on the thwart, is because if you do a single attack and a single thwart, that is exactly 3 health, which means Starhawk returns to your hand. So ideally, you're able to play Starhawk, do a single attack, do a single thwart, and have it return to your hand and be able to play it again or use it as a resource for 2 costs, which I think is still worth it. It might not be the best way to use it if you're not using it as a blocker, but that's where we get into the overall high potential of Starhawk. Now, it's not always going to work out this way, but it has for me, and it feels so good when it does. You can take a block and have it deal exactly 3 damage to Starhawk, or 2 if he's already taken damage, whatever the case may be, and have the block essentially send Starhawk back to your hand, which is the best case scenario. The best case scenario is that you've used Starhawk for something, either an attack or a thwart, then he takes an attack, blocks, nullifies that attack, and returns to your hand. That is the top echelon of potential for Starhawk, and it's so great when it happens. Again, it will not always happen that way, especially if there's boost cards involved. You're gonna have to get lucky for that situation to arise. But with minions, it might be easier to plan that way, or will be easier to plan that way. But I just think that Starhawk's potential there is so good, and it's done wonders for me when it's worked out that way. And it's not also the fact that Starhawk returns to your hand and you can play him again. Sometimes just returning Starhawk to your hand to essentially gain an extra card as a resource to play something else is more than worth it. You can't always just look at it as, oh, I'll have to play 2 resources again to play Starhawk again. So yes, I get him again, but I have to repay for him. Sometimes that resource is absolutely worth it. Think of it as, you play an ally that gets an attack or a thwart, blocks an entire attack that comes in on you and nullifies it, and gives you a resource to your hand. That's insanely worth it for 2 costs. And again, that's the top potential. It's not always going to happen that way, but even just playing Starhawk, getting an attack, getting a thwart out, getting a resource back to your hand, it essentially means that Starhawk cost 1. If that whole thing happens that way, if you play Starhawk, do an attack, do a thwart, turn him to your hand and use him as a resource, that is a 1 cost ally. They gave you 2 damage and a thwart, and then, that is absolutely worth it. So overall, I really, really like the design of this card. I really, really like what I've seen from Starhawk so far and how it's worked out for me. Again, it could move up, it could also move down because it's so new, it's hard to, be completely 100% sure of its placement, but I am pretty confident that the Starhawk is a pretty solid ally, at least in my case, in the decks that I'm playing, that's been the case, and I also have a ton of fun playing Starhawk. So that is number 4. Let's move on to number 3. All right, number 3 is from the Doctor Strange pack, and that is Clea. So Clea is a 2-cost ally with 1 thwart, 1 attack, a consequential damage on each of those, an interrupt ability that when Clea is defeated, return her to the owner's deck and shuffle the deck, obviously. So Clea is very good for the reason that she can kind of be viewed as this persistent, endless blocker. Now, obviously she doesn't stay in play when she's defeated, so it's not quite this permanent blocker, but she constantly goes back to your deck, and she's a cheap ally, which means every time you draw her again, it will likely be very easy to play her, and you'll likely want to because the fact that it's this blocker that keeps getting put out and you can keep relying on being in your deck. You never have to worry about her being in your discard pile or the fact that that blocker is gone. You will always have this 2-cost ally showing up in your hand to soak up a hit for you. And that's generally what she's gonna do. She's gonna soak up a giant hit for you. You'll also probably get a single thwart or a single attack out of her when you play her. So you get a potential 1 damage or remove one scheme, but then you get this blocker that can block a huge attack, go back in your deck, and then do that whole process again. And in protection, anytime you can have an ally do that legwork for you and free up your hero to do other stuff and you don't have to defend. Some heroes will want to, and heroes like Quicksilver, have the ability to defend freely. But in general, if you can not have to worry about that and do other things with your hero, that's how you're gonna, especially in solo play, that's how you're gonna have to function to be able to take out the villain, but still make sure that you're not taking a whole bunch of hits. Clea helps you do that in spades. That it's so wonderful to have this permanent blocker that just keeps showing up and doesn't cost very much to put out. That's where the benefit of Clea is, and that's where in my experience I've had the most mileage out of her. Is just this, I can always rely on it. If she's not in my hand and she's not in play, I can look at my deck and say, I know Clea's coming out, so when I draw my next hand, there's a good chance I'll get her, and if not, depending on how thin the deck is, you can very much depend on having this blocker showing up, and you can count on that. And I think that that's awesome. It also, another minor thing is it, slows down the process of completely going through your deck. And if you get really low and she goes into your deck when you only have a couple of cards, you can guarantee that you're drawing her the next turn, so you get back-to-back turns with Clea. There's a whole bunch of benefits. She's a great ally. It's a great card. And in my experience, more than earns this spot on the list. For some people, she might even be higher than this. So that's Clea, number 3. Let's move on. Okay, coming in at number 2, this is probably one of the most unique allies in the game. He was introduced in the Quicksilver pack. I'm talking, of course, about Multiple Man. So Multiple Man is the only ally that comes with multiple copies, 3 copies to be exact. It's a 4 cost for 2 health, 1 thwart, 1 attack, consequential damage on each, and the ability is where it gets unique. So the ability is response after Multiple Man enters play, search your deck and hand for a copy of Multiple Man and put it into play. Shuffle your deck if it was searched this way. So what happens here, and the important thing to note, is that when you play 1 copy of Multiple Man, the copy that you search for also triggers that ability in the same way, which means that essentially playing 1 copy of this card puts all 3 into play. That is obviously good for a number of reasons. I'll get this out of the way first. It thins your deck. So that's 3 cards removed from your deck, and it's going to allow you to draw into the other cards that you want to draw into. Thinning your deck in any sense in any of these kind of card games is a huge deal. I won't get into all the the mathematics and the reasons why here, but it's a great thing to be able to thin your deck. Removing 3 cards out and having them actually be beneficial to you to be out in the first place is a great incentive. But on top of that, you're essentially for 4 costs getting 3 blockers and being able to do 3 damage or 3 thwart or a combination of those 2 for 4 costs, which is absolutely worth it. You have to look at it as the fact that you play this copy of Multiple Man, you get 3 out, and now for the next 3 turns, you're essentially not, I don't want to say you're invulnerable, because a lot of things can happen, and obviously you can still take damage, but in terms of villain attacks coming your way or minion attacks, you can take 3, which means you can potentially be safe for 3 turns, especially if you start the game with Multiple Man out. There's not gonna be minions in play yet. The villain, you can stay in hero form for now 3 turns in a row and not worry about the villain doing damage to you. There's so much incentive to have 3 guaranteed blockers that also are able to do a little ping damage on each of them as well. So the important thing to consider here, though, is that all of this depends on Multiple Man having all 3 copies hit the table. As soon as you're only hitting 2 copies to the table, the value starts to decrease a lot. So for 4 cost to only do 2 damage or 2 thwart and take 2 hits, the 2 hits being soaked up is still fantastic, but it depreciates a lot in value here. So you'd never want to build a deck with less than 3 copies of Multiple Man, at least in my opinion. And your biggest incentive here, the thing you're trying to do, is to have Multiple Man be in your opening hand. You want it, the best thing you can do is play Multiple Man right at the very start. Use that as the main action you're doing for your turn, have all 3 copies out, and start the game feeling absolutely safe for 3 turns. That's what you want to do with Multiple Man, whether you're trying to mulligan into him or getting lucky with drawing him in the first place. As you go on and it takes longer to find a Multiple Man, there's a bit better chance that you're going to end up with multiple copies in your hand. It's going to be harder to play one, or one of the copies can get discarded in some way to your discard pile. If a copy of Multiple Man ends up in your discard pile, it's devastating because then you can only get 2 copies. This obviously doesn't search your discard pile. All of that being said, the upper tier of what you can accomplish with the Multiple Man, I think, makes him so worth it to include. And I've started so many games with 3 copies of this ally in play and felt so safe and been able to do so much stuff to build my kit and attack the villain and get the board under control, while basically these allies are just handling the situation for me. I love Multiple Man from a design perspective, from a fun perspective, a gameplay perspective. I think he's an absolutely phenomenal ally. I think that he's going to be one that I said it at the time I did the Quicksilver video, that this might be one that is not an auto include in protection decks, but is very close to being that. I still stand by that. I think that it doesn't end up in every protection deck, but I think you're hard pressed to find a better ally replacement in a lot of situations, as long as you commit to saying, I'm going to play Multiple Man. This isn't an ally that you can draw into your hand and be like, I guess I won't play it, I'll use it as a resource, because tossing it into your discard pile is devastating for the other 2 copies. You kind of just have to say, if I'm playing a deck with Multiple Man, I am going to play this card when I draw it, and I'm going to love it. And you will. It's a great ally. So that is Multiple Man at number 2. Let's go into number 1. Okay, so number 1 honestly shouldn't be too much of a surprise to anyone who's played a lot of protection. This is honestly one of the better allies in the game, period, not just in protection. That is Iron Fist from the Doctor Strange pack. So 4 cost, 3 health, 1 thwart, 2 attack, consequential damage on each. It comes into play with 2 mystic counters on Iron Fist. Response: when Iron Fist specifically attacks, you can remove 1 mystic counter from him, stun that enemy, and deal 1 damage to it. Phenomenal ally. So with 2 attack, if you did 3 attacks total with Iron Fist, for 4 cost, you're getting 6 damage already on that. You're getting an additional 2 damage off of 2 of those attacks based on his ability. So that goes up to 8 damage, and 2 stuns across 2 different enemies, which are gonna be the villain, a minion, whatever. That is insane value for 4. Anything that stuns is already very good. So even if it didn't do the single extra damages, this card would still be phenomenal, just being able to do an attack for 2 and stun reliably twice off the same ally. And because it only has 2 Mystic counters, if you don't do one of the thwarts or an extra attack, you can essentially play this card, do an attack of 2 and stun, do an attack of 2 and stun, and then block an attack and soak up a huge hit and have Iron Fist leave the table having done an insane amount of value for you. I think Iron Fist is such a phenomenal ally, probably, you know, almost getting into levels of just being too powerful, because it's one of those ones that how do you release a more powerful version? Is this the upper tier in terms of power level on an ally? It's so good having the stuns. It's so good, even the efficiency of the attack still. Honestly, this card probably could have been 1 attack and 1 thwart, and it still would have seen play just based on the stuns alone and the consistency there. So all around, I think that it's a great, one of my favorite things about it is that so much attention is usually placed on lower cost allies, and understandably, because they can be chump blockers, they can have an ability, block a hit. That's a huge value in Marvel Champions. I love when higher cost allies, like especially 4 cost tends to be that one where anything above is a little bit too expensive, but 4 you can still get a lot of value out of. Anytime one of these higher cost allies ends up being super powerful and super, it's super important to include them in a deck and people love them, I love it, because I don't want the game just to always be about really cheap allies that their main purpose is just to take a hit. Iron Fist is a great example of one that his whole purpose is not just to take a hit. That's an extra incentive. He has an actual function when he's on the table, and that is he's going to stun, he's going to do a decent amount of damage, and then he's going to take a hit for you on his way out. I love Iron Fist. I think he's a great ally, and like I said, he's honestly one of the better allies across all the aspects. So in terms of, if you're looking for a pack to get and to add to your protection cards and give you some more protection options and allies, Doctor Strange is a pretty solid pack, because you get number 1 and number 3 on this list, Iron Fist and Clea, which will get you well on your way. So that is Iron Fist, number 1. And there you have it. Those are my top 5 favorite protection allies. There are obviously some that didn't make this list that I still think are great allies. And some of them are, I brought this up in other cases, some of them are situational, but in those situations, they would top some of these allies I have on my list. Like a good example would be Nova. If you include Nova in the right deck that has those energy resources, you're gonna get a ton of value out of Nova, and you're gonna probably wonder, of course I would slot Nova over Warlock on this list. I think that it's just gonna depend on your play style and what kind of decks you're playing. The decks that I'm playing and the heroes I play the most, and the type way I build my decks, these are the 5 that I find to be the most effective and universal across some of the decks I'm playing. But that being said, when it comes to Nova or Luke Cage or Brother Voodoo, there's a bunch of options that I'm sure are still very, very good in their niche, or across multiple decks. And I would love to hear about it. So just let me know in the comments which ones that you think that you use the most, or which ones you do use the most, and why, and why you would include them on your list. I'd love to hear about it. That's my favorite part of making this videos, is seeing the feedback and being able to talk about it with you guys in the comments. So I'd love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. And one last little piece of advice I'll give you is that if you are someone that is looking for, which hero pack do I buy next? And I can't buy them all, but I want to have some deck building tools. Which one should I buy? If protection is something that interests you and you like the protection aspect, honestly, take a look at the list here, because all of these cards, all these allies that I've listed here, obviously these are just the allies, they're not the other event cards, are spread across 3 packs, and that is Doctor Strange, Quicksilver, and the Galaxy's Most Wanted. Obviously, Galaxy's Most Wanted is a bigger expansion, costs a little bit more, but you go out and buy Quicksilver and Doctor Strange, and I have a really, really solid base of protection tools to be able to use if that aspect interests you. So keep that in mind, a little tidbit for you there if you're looking for what to buy next. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Again, we're gonna have a bunch more Marvel content on the horizon. I'll tip you off right now. I'm gonna be doing the Star-Lord video, I'm gonna be doing a Gamora video as soon as those packs are released, and because they are released on the same day, I'm gonna do a special 3rd video that is actually Star-Lord versus Gamora, which one I think is better, which one I think you should buy if you're only going to buy one, and which one I've enjoyed the most, and kind of compare and contrast the pros and cons of each one. So as soon as that releases, which I think is May 14th, May 15th, it's somewhere, whatever the Friday is there, during that weekend, probably on the Sunday or the Monday, you're gonna see these videos start to drop, and we're gonna have a flood of Marvel content come in. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.